In this video I will be showing my solo game design prototype called Floor is Lava. It's a first-person narrative game designed for PEGI 12 audiences. The aim of the project is to demonstrate how storytelling can be communicated through level design and gameplay. I'll walk through the first level of the game while explaining my inspiration, research, and the design choices I made to create a story from a child's imaginative perspective. The idea for Floor is Lava was mainly inspired by narrative-focused games like Among the Sleep and What Remains of Edith Finch. I was particularly interested in how these games tell their stories through gameplay and environment, rather than relying heavily on dialogue or cutscenes. In Among the Sleep, you play from the perspective of a toddler, which means normal household objects become obstacles. For example, the player has to climb onto furniture to reach things like door handles. I like this idea of designing the environment around the child's point of view, and I use that concept when designing my own level design. What Remains of Edith Finch also influenced my project because of how it tells the story visually as the player moves through different spaces. The player learns about the narrative by exploring the environment, which is an example of environmental storytelling. Environmental storytelling is when the space itself communicates parts of the story through objects, layout, and visual details, rather than directly explaining everything to the player. For my game, I am going to use a child's perspective to reframe fear in a non-graphic way, so that it fits the PEGI 12 rating really well. To me, environmental storytelling is important. The main threat will be implied through the atmosphere and not explicit violence towards the player. So when the player reaches the landing, it's got colder and almost darker lighting, creating that fear and uncertainty for the player. Whereas, say, the parent's room or the child's own room might be lighter coloured and warmer feeling because they feel safe in there and it's a nice, safe environment. Whereas they're going into the unknown when they enter places such as the landing area or the bathroom or the office or downstairs that's even further away. I looked at other media such as movies, and the movie Elemental uses the environment to represent feelings. For example, Ember's environment is a direct reflection of her internal pressure and anger because she's fire, but Wade's environment is fluid and open, representing a comfortable, emotional, open space. The movie uses non-threatening visual representation of dangerous elements to keep it age appropriate. Why is my game appropriate for ages 12 plus, you may ask? Well, all threats exist purely within the child's imagination and are not realistic depictions of violence or harm. There's no violence towards the player character in my game. There's no combat, there's no enemies or friendlies that are harmed in any way. The hazards are all in the environment, which it's not graphic, detailed, violent. It's unrealistic and stylized. To create fear for the player, there's mild tension, but not like in-your-face jump scares or anything. Like, fear is implied but not explicitly laid out in front of the player. The themes are emotions, but that can be like implied. And there's no explicit depiction of trauma, although for older audiences that could also be implied or looked into. It's all interpretable rather than disturbing, so that it's nice for the younger audience, but also detailed enough for the older audience to get something out of it too. The visual style uses bright colours, exaggerated environments, with no realistic injury or death. So by representing danger through stylized fantasy rather than realism, my game aligns with the PEGI 12 guidelines while still exploring emotional depth of my character. The importance of my imaginary friend. My robot friend or the imaginary friend of the character, is actually a Peggy-friendly design tool because it reduces tension, prevents isolation and anxiety for the player. So there will be parts in my game where you're not always with the robot imaginary friend, and that might create mild fear or tension. The robot friend will reassure younger players they're not alone, so it's not scary, and it keeps the tone non-threatening for them, and softens the fear themes. Like, you could literally argue that the companion NPC ensures that moments of fear are balanced with the emotional safety, aligning the experience with the Peggy 12 guidelines that I have previously talked about. My imaginary friend character is critical to the narrative as he is a emotional anchor for the character and guides the player through the game. So he's my guidance system as well, ensuring that moments of tension remain reassuring rather than threatening, because obviously you don't want to scare young players. Mechanics are introduced gradually to maintain narrative pacing and prevent overload, allowing younger players to interpret the world easily and follow the narrative as well as the mechanics, but still fast-paced enough for older players to not get bored, and they're able to look at the world through the child's perspective. Visual readability and platform placement were prioritised to preserve immersion and avoid breaking the emotional flow with frustration. Anyway, let's talk winning and losing conditions. If the player touches the lava, they fail and respawn in the last doorway they crossed through. So, say there's lava in the office room, and you last crossed through the office room door, you would spawn in that doorway, so that you're not all the way back in the child's bedroom having to go to wherever you last played. The first person's perspective further strengthens narrative engagement by placing the player directly within the child's reality. So, you are the child, and you can visualize that because you're shorter in game, and you can see things from their perspective, how they might react to certain things rather than an older person might react to certain things. Overall, my level decisions prioritize storytelling, emotional continuity, and player interpretation, ensuring that the gameplay consistently serves the narrative experience. Thank you. Overall, I think the strongest part of my project was the environmental communication. The use of spatial storytelling worked well because the player is able to understand the situation through exploring the house rather than being told directly through dialogue. Elements such as the crayon drawings on the walls, the lava spreading through the house, and the placement of objects like toys and furniture help reinforce the idea that the world is being interpreted through a child's imagination. The use of the robot toy NPC also worked well, as it helped guide the player whilst keeping the tone reassuring and appropriate for a younger audience. Additionally, the simplified visual style using block colours was effective because it kept the environment readable and supported the idea of stylized imaginative world. However, there are multiple things that I could have improved on if the project were to be developed further. One improvement would be expanding the level design to include more interactive narrative moments. So, letting the player discover more about the character and their situation through the environment. The puzzles could also still be developed further to create a slightly deeper progression system while still remaining accessible for the target audience, 12+. Another improvement would be refining the visual presentation by adding more lighting, variation and environmental details to strengthen the atmosphere of each space within the house. Finally, if more time were available, I would expand the narrative further to include additional dialogue from the imaginary friend, and more environmental clues to build a clearer emotional progression throughout the levels. Overall, the research I carried out into narrative games and environmental storytelling directly informed the final decision of the prototype. Looking at games that focus on storytelling through exploration helped shape my level layout, puzzles, design, and visual style. This research allowed me to create a prototype that demonstrates how gameplay mechanics, environment, and narrative can work together to communicate a story. Thank you for listening.